Hello, how's everybody doing? It is Thursday evening, a little after 6 p.m. on the last day of April 2020. My name is Joe Crescente. I am an REI alum from 2007, and I'm currently living in Moscow, where I am the Media Literacy Fellow at the American Center, which is part of the embassy, the U.S. Embassy here in Moscow. I do different presentations on media literacy, both here in Moscow, and once upon a time I was able to go out a little bit into the country and also give different seminars, workshops, etc. on media literacy, something that I think recent months in particular have shown is it's a pretty important topic, and we definitely globally aren't up to speed on it, don't have it as part of our skill set, so to speak, as good as we should, I think. So I think I'll just talk a little bit about what life is like here in Moscow, and then I'll get into some of the things I've seen as an observer. I've been reading a lot of news, obviously doing a lot of online presentations on media literacy. So I'll just kind of offer you some of my greatest hits. As for what life is like, when I went to Vladivostok at the very beginning, at the end of February, the beginning of March. It was such a different world, I don't think anybody wore a mask either there or back. I saw a few people in the airports with masks, but nobody on my flight. And definitely in Vladivostok, I didn't see almost anybody. It was there, it was lingering, but nobody was particularly worried about it the way we are today. It wasn't a part of it was part of everyday life back then, but it wasn't a part of every second of our lives, It wasn't determining everything that was going on. And I was supposed to do a lot of travel in March around Russia, and it all got, after Vladivostok, and it all got canceled. So I haven't left my neighborhood. I think I counted today, and it's 45 days. And I haven't left this apartment except for three trips to go shopping, twice to take out trash. So I've been outside. I've opened the door 5 times in the last 32 days, I think is correct. 559 square feet is the size of the place that I live in. Fortunately, I do have a balcony, and when it's sunny out, I can get some air. Okay, so what have I been doing? It's probably no different than what people are doing in other parts of the world, spending a lot of time online, reading a lot about COVID-19, reading some books, getting some writing done, doing online workouts from YouTube. I'm sure, if anything, I did hear somebody say that, we're all experiencing this so differently. We're not all coming together, but I think when it comes down to it, there are some things, that a lot of us are experiencing that are quite similar. I think when we do start to look back at this period 5 years from now, I think we will see that, humanity hopefully learned a lot together during this period, while still acknowledging, the disparities and the dangerousness of some occupations, and the class inequalities and so on that exist around the world. Anyway, to go into it, I kind of went through some of the presentations I have and tried to remember, because I started giving presentations on COVID-19 in mid-February as kind of a way to take a different track and kind of go in a slightly different direction. Hopefully, switch things up from the standard, let's talk about fact-checking and confirmation bias and, sources and headlines, and try to, bring some kind of real-world examples to it. So I did kind of use COVID-19 a little bit early on, but it was so much different. It was almost nostalgic to look back at some of the presentations that I gave 2.5 months ago, because what we know now is so much different, and how much things have changed, and how much the world has changed, and how much uh, economics have changed, and so on and so forth. It's just all very, very different today. But some of the things that I think overall that I've learned by thinking about both media literacy along with COVID-19 are, this is definitely a very different pandemic, and it's definitely the first truly global pandemic in slightly different ways. Obviously, I'm not taking away from 1918 to 1920, the influenza epidemic then that was certainly very global. But our economy, and when I say our economy, I mean the global economy, it's just so interconnected in ways, that even if we go back to SARS and some earlier epidemics, just didn't have the impact, right? We weren't traveling nearly as much around the world. China in the beginning, right? Uh, China wasn't even part of the WTO until late 2001. So when, the SARS epidemic happened in 2003, it definitely wasn't the same kind of level of integration that we had. Certainly Russia didn't have the level of flights and the level of integration with different economies around the world, different trading partners, at the level that it does today. So that was one big takeaway just to think about. But it wasn't even that long ago, right? I'm not that old, and yet, when I was a child, there just weren't nearly as many places to get news as there are today, right? Think about this: in 1980, at their peak, the big three broadcasters, that'd be Dan Rather, Peter Jennings, and Tom Brokaw, captured 75% of the audience share in the United States, admittedly, when their nightly news programs were aired. So I think a big takeaway is it used to be much easier to inform the public of what's going on, especially in a challenging and changing situation. People definitely looked to significantly fewer sources for authoritative information. On February 2nd, the World Health Organization called COVID-19 a massive infodemic, referring to, quote, an overabundance, of information, some accurate and some not, that makes it hard for people to find trustworthy sources and reliable guidance, when they need it. So I think that's a big distinction that sets the COVID-19 apart from previous viral outbreaks, and it's social media is another huge part of it. I think we've seen that social media, search engines, and health organizations and governments join forces in tremendous ways, even in ways that I think, weren't even that anticipated. You couldn't anticipate even that long ago, right? For example, Google pushes, WHO information to the top of people's search results for coronavirus-related queries. Facebook has been targeting specific populations and demographics with ads that provide important health information. Yandex offers self-isolation indexes here in Russia that let you know, in many Russian cities anyway, that let you know how many people are out in the city at any given time on the streets, so that you know when it's safe, to go for a quick grocery trip. Certainly social media has gone both ways, providing both a platform for misinformation and xenophobic content, particularly in the beginning, but also insights into what was going on in China in the early months that would have been unfathomable during previous pandemics, right? And I think definitely the role of social media and how governments have reacted because of the unavoidable transparency of information and dissemination of information is very new to this event, or whatever you want to call it. And I think in the early days, when I say early days, right, I mean 2-3 months ago, earlier this year. In the early days, though, say January, February, I think disinformation prevailed, particularly about blame. Who was to blame? The actual virus itself, whether it was a real thing or if it was just another flu. There were a lot of questionable experts out there. People, and this has been a problem generally in the media in recent years about people playing the role of historian and expert and this, that, and the celebrities standing in to talk about X issue. Unqualified people commenting on things that have, real ramifications, for example. And as well as, definitely there's been a lot of subpar and often potentially dangerous medical information. So in the first couple months, I think there were a lot of things out there that could capture the imagination, get people scared, get people to spread them further. The bad health information was a really big one in the beginning, because there was an information vacuum, which can be defined as a lack of information which may exacerbate and increase the severity of a crisis and may induce rumor and gossip, and this is a big term that's used in like security risk analysis, right? It arises from the organizational failure to satisfy stakeholders' informational demands during crises, right? We're all stakeholders in this world, I guess. But I think the biggest moment that I experienced was when my 70-something-year-old neighbor, Olga Mikhailovna, who lives next door, passed on to us a message she had gotten over WhatsApp from a doctor, a Russian doctor, who was supposedly on the ground in Wuhan and was an expert in infectious diseases, and he had secret insights, special insights into what was going on. And once I asked people, hey, have you seen this kind of thing? So many people in so many iterations of this kind of message, got in touch with me and told me about it. And some of the things that you would see here is, such experts, whether or not they exist is questionable, but they would always throw about like anonymous or semi-anonymous sources and advice, right? They would talk about like Taiwanese doctors say, or Japanese infectious disease specialists say, according to recent data. If you're an expert, you're gonna and you want to convince people of something, just like a good journalist, you're going to give as much information as possible. If you want people to believe you, that as much as transparency as you can get out there is the best possible avenue. So if you don't see that, put your skepticism meter up, right? It should go way up. If you're an expert, why are you, resorting to some like weird WhatsApp kind of messaging thing? Why are you not, appearing in a legitimate source of information? Why are sources all these anonymous, right, without links so that people can check the information they provided for themselves, right? We live in a time when I don't think fact checking and the kind of tenets of media literacy are as strong as they should be, but I think people, a large swath of people are savvy enough to know that they should look for stuff. But, there are certain populations, particularly the elderly, who can be sometimes vulnerable in these kinds of situations. My neighbor lives alone. She has no one else to turn to. Her only living relative is her mother, who's 102. So, she came to us and asked us what we thought. Have we heard of this? And there was all sorts of questionable stuff about, if you gargle this, you'll be fine. If you eat this, you'll be fine, et cetera, et cetera. Gargle hot water, you'll help you beat the virus, or keep your mouth moist is important. All different methods for self-diagnoses, none of which you'll ever see on any kind of legitimate, government scientific website. But these kinds of messages are often mixed with some good information, which makes it particularly dangerous, right? Fake news outlets often use symbols, right? As an example, use symbols of mainstream media outlets to gain authority, right? So, similarly, by offering familiar tips or things that sound like they might be true, this helps build trust with people, especially vulnerable people. But for me, I think the main thing is it became clear that there were multiple stories out there, not just one. In the beginning, I was like, there were two stories at least, right? There's the health one and there's the economic one, and people were very concerned about that because they were starting to realize, oh wow, we are really interconnected and dependent on one another for travel, for markets, trade, and so on and so forth. This is potentially going to be just as devastating potentially as the health one. But when there are multiple, and I think there's been multiple stories about a variety of things ever since then, and they've just multiplied, right? Um, but when there are so many stories out there, I think this is quite disorienting for media consumers, right? I think media consumers like succinct answers, but this is clearly a global pandemic with a variety of approaches taken, from the very strict to quite lenient or open, right? And what people want is very different. Even in individual cities, right? Some people want serious lockdowns and are ready to hunker down for a year if necessary, and other people want things to open up as soon as possible for a variety of reasons. For economic reasons, for liberty reasons, and so on and so forth. There's an information vacuum, though. Not everything can be known. People want answers, and they definitely want simple narratives, and the media, can't provide that. Especially, scientists can't ever provide that, right? A good scientist would always say, based on what we know at this exact moment, this is the best prognosis I could give for a certain issue. But that doesn't fit into this, kind of black and white, post-truth era that we live in. But I think for me, the main stories became things that you could follow, right? I mean, that's the best you can do, right? Just like a scientist says, but this is the best information we have. I think for me as a media consumer, what I could follow is like the most trustworthy. I don't think that we'll know if we're past this, honestly, until we're well past this. I don't think we can say with any degree of certainty what it is, what's going on, and there was a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of uncertainty, right? We absolutely can't predict anything. Day to day, you just got to take. We've never been in a moment where we've really had to live in the moment like we do now. But we can follow stuff. For me, testing numbers, death statistics, hopefully antibody tests, which are coming soon, will help us get a better understanding of how widespread the pandemic really is. When I say death statistics, I think many scientists are in agreement that somewhere between 0.7 and 1 is death, percentage of deaths, right? So 0.7% to 1% is probably what their best guess is of the death rate for COVID-19. And if you look at death statistics, you could assume that it's about 100 times that, the number of people that have been infected, right? Obviously, death statistics, definitely there's a lot of stories out there that in various countries, they might not have been accurately captured for a variety of reasons. So, that'll adjust. But I think, if anything is shown, even based on myself and what I thought, several months ago, you have to constantly readjust and keep a very open mind going through this thing, because we expect history, right? When we're living through journalism, right? The idea being that journalism is the first draft of history, and we want to already know what's happened, and we won't know that for the full scale of it for a very long time. Some things you can do: you can talk to your grandparents, your parents, and neighbors about what they've heard about the coronavirus. I think it's a good thing to talk about it, and to make sure that people have good information. Right? If your parents, grandparents, neighbors aren't great fact checkers, ask them to forward any potential misinformation to you so you can help them out with it. And maybe you can do it for them and then show them what you did, right? This could be an opportunity, for sure, to, if you've, my father has not always been the most savvy media consumer, but I've definitely, used the COVID-19 situation to show him the importance of checking facts, very carefully, and checking health information very carefully. So, maybe you can use this opportunity as well. I would say, some other things that I've seen. Be skeptical of even your smartest friends, right? Some of your I think that, people with significant education, sometimes can get away with things that other people, people with less, prominent education, can't. I definitely would say that in the last, couple of years, that I've been working, as a media literacy specialist, I've definitely caught a lot of, people with, PhDs, master's degrees, involved in all sorts of, creative and analytical kinds of professions, sharing less than skeptical stuff. Everybody's human, right? Just like a journalist will make a mistake from time to time. Your smartest friends might share something that they did not fact check because they thought it was interesting one night, and they were, didn't feel up for, really checking the source. My experience has shown that people tend to trust people who they perceive to be more educated, but they're not any less likely to share less than optimal information. For medical advice, listen to experts. I just leave it at that. Medical advice, right? Obviously medical advice goes through different organs, but for the basic stuff, about what you should do and how you should, operate. I leave that up to medical experts, infectious disease specialists, people who are on the front lines, and so on and so forth. It's great, I think, that we have so much varied information today, but we can get lost in it. And I think, this can make us distrustful or suspicious of other info when we should be merely skeptical of it, right? And I think, skepticism, a healthy dose of skepticism is really important for anybody who purports to be a media literate person, right? But our confirmation bias can also play a role in this, right? Confirmation bias being this idea that, the tendency to interpret and analyze things according to your beliefs and your experiences, right? The idea that, you want something to be true, so it's true. And you can find information that, kind of proves that, so to speak. And, this results from being stuck in our different informational media bubbles, where we're only seeing information, kind of being shared by people who have very different experiences and interests as we do, and so on. People have their own trusted sources. Today in particular, right? And it becomes much more challenging to inform the public in such a situation as the one we're in, because people are looking in different places for information they trust, right? As a result, untrue things get shared even when there's no evidence that something is being seriously considered, right? I remember back, like, somebody saying something about, they're going to ban alcohol in Russia or something. And nowhere was that necessarily true. In very limited circumstances, in some remote regions, there were kind of like reduced hours maybe for alcohol sales during the quarantine period, but never was that true. And then when you ask a person about it, they're like, well, but it'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? So sometimes people are sharing things that they want to be true, but it's not doesn't necessarily mean it's true, right? People's desires for something to happen can often influence what they think they know about it, So lastly, if I were to leave you with three pieces of advice or wisdom, whatever you want to call it, from my perch here, some stories are too good to be true. I'm not gonna explain any of these either. Some stories are too good to be true. Remember that not all research is created equal, and think before you share. It has been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing all the other videos in this series. Be well, try to stay healthy, wash your hands. Yeah, thank you for your attention.